Hi everyone, and welcome to this overview of the power sector study, also known as the corporate strategy and transformation study. So this overview, which is about 30 slides, will take you through the high level background and structuring of the training program we have to come up. Now, the entire training program is over 680 videos and there's close to 3,000 slides. So it's quite a substantial study with a lot of detail in terms of how we did every single part. So if you are just interested in how to run a strategy workshop, there's a whole section on that. If you're just interested in how to work out the finances for a turnaround and transformation, there's a whole section on that. So there's a bit for everyone. This overview is not going to go into the details of all those sections, but will give you some sense of what to expect and how to use it. Now, like all of our training programs, we have only one objective. After watching a complete program, a client will be able to walk into any strategy, operations, or implementation assignment and complete the study both accurately and with confidence. So our material is used around the world by many different companies, by many consulting firms, by many aspiring consultants, and so on. And it's designed so that they can watch it, go in and do it, and people wouldn't be able to know the difference versus if they were an ex-consultant or not. That's our primary objective. And in putting this together, our goal is really to have these very incredibly detailed and effective strategy training programs. And we don't try to avoid the fact that we are aiming to have better training than McKinsey or BCG. And as long as consultants of those firms remain clients of our training program, we know to some extent we are reaching that goal. Another goal we aim to achieve is the Monday morning 8 a.m. rule. The Monday morning 8 a.m. rule is a very simple rule. We aim to move away from theoretical stuff. We don't do theoretical training. We provide training in such a sense that even if we explain something theoretical to you, we'll explain to you how to break it down into the little practical steps. Now, our goal is that what would you do at Monday morning, 8 a.m. with this study? Do you know the actual steps you can take on a Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, so that when you get in, you know what to do and you can follow it? So the Monday morning 8 a.m. rule is very important for us. Right? All our training is broken down into little steps, so you can just replicate the steps when you need to get into the office. Now, this particular study is broken down into 750 steps. Everything from how to write a proposal to run a strategy planning workshop, we've got them broken down so you can follow it. You don't have to go through the whole study. It is recommended you do that because then you can understand the context, all the issues and how they came together. But if you don't have time to do that, you can pick the sections you would like to go through. We cater for executives, consultants, and analysts. I think for analysts, this may be a bit of an overkill because they wouldn't understand some of the issues. It's more catering for the senior levels of consultants and managers to executives. But of course, we do have many analysts joining the program. It depends on how you want to manage your career. If you want to understand the bigger picture, the broader picture, this program can do it. And like all of our programs, we do use consulting partners to put together the training program. So the leadership, communication, and analytics skills we teach are those that consulting partners have and those that consulting partners are looking for in teams and also within clients to some extent. So let's get into the actual study itself, right? Now, it's called a corporate strategy and transformation study because it is that. This is not just a corporate strategy study. If it was a corporate strategy study by itself, it would be a much smaller study, right? And we'll talk through the differences between corporate strategy and transformation in the program. There's a lot of material dedicated to those differences. If you're using the tech merger strategy study, that was corporate strategy for a merger where the objective function was known. The lab study was a market entry strategy where the objective function was known. Here, the objective function is not very well known. That's why we're calling it corporate strategy, right? It's a key thing. In corporate strategy, the objective function of the client is not known, and the client generally wants you to pick a market. Those are the two rules. People always like to say that it's corporate strategy defined by whom you serve, the level of the impact you're having. That's not true. If you're picking a market and the objective function is not known and you're obviously working for the most senior decision makers of the company, that's corporate strategy. If you're working for the most senior decision makers of the company and the objective function is known and you're not picking a market, it's not corporate strategy. And of course, that's explained in more details in the videos within the training program. Now let's just talk about Empire International, right? Empire International was created in 2012. It basically operates across parts of Eastern Europe, the Middle East where it is based, and North Africa. So it's basically operating in 3 countries, right? And it was created in 2012 because at that time its parent company had just finished a major program to build power stations. And when that program had ended, it ended somewhere around the mid-2000 period, early 2000, the parent company, Empire Energy, which is based in the GCC, was left with all of these engineering skills and capabilities and assets that it no longer needed in the regulated side of the business. Now, when I say regulated, what that means is that there's a government agency that determines what electricity rates should be charged and how costs should be managed on their balance sheets. That is known as a regulated market, and it's usually the side of the market that is involved with the generation, distribution, and transmission of electricity. The construction side is not generally regulated. So what Empire Energy did is they said, okay, we'll take all of our skills and talent that was used to build power stations, we'll spin it off into a separate company, and that company would serve the non-regulated side of the market. If it's not regulated, if there's no cap on the tariffs and the rates, theoretically, you should make more money with higher returns, right? Now, Empire International, as that new business turned out to be called, expanded quite rapidly. The blue areas are where it started off, and the orange arrow shows you where by the time we had come in, they had set up some kind of operation. So they expanded quite rapidly, and at their peak, they had expanded to 17 countries with plans to go into even more. A big focus areas for them was Central Asia and Asia Minor, West Africa. Eastern Europe was always attractive, but it turned out to be quite competitive given the fact that French and German companies had recently entered along with the Chinese, right? So Empire International was an energy company that helped design, build, operate, and maintain generation, transmission, and distribution assets for other companies around the world. That's basically its entire business model, right? Now, as you can see, Empire International had expanded quite significantly all over the world, right? Many different countries, and this is the major locations. It did have interest in other countries not listed here. Now, to manage this hodgepodge of businesses, Empire International was structured in a very interesting way. In a nutshell, it was basically this cross-holding of individual companies, and I'm going to come to that in a second, right? So here you have Empire Energy, the parent company, right? They owned Empire International 100%. It's a wholly owned individual company, quite a subsidiary or whatever you want. But Empire International had its own board. They followed their own instructions. They did whatever the hell they wanted. They shared some office space, but nothing substantial. For all intents and purposes, Empire International was a separate company doing its own thing, and Empire Energy only really wanted the dividends from Empire International. But at the same time, Empire International had long-term agreements with Empire Energy to service their generation arm, power stations, transmission arm, those lines connecting the power station to rural areas and cities, and distribution arm, which is basically the movement of electricity within big urban areas, right? Now, Empire International split into basically 5 arms, right? One is support services. This is the biggest arm of the business, over 80% of the business. They did it mostly engineering consulting, maintenance, construction, design work for generation, transmission, and distribution companies. Now, there are over 98 separate companies sitting in here, all of them separately incorporated with their own boards and so on, and they are wholly owned by Empire International or sometimes partly owned by Empire International. Each of these businesses largely operated independently, and there was really little coordination between them. So Empire International had this holding structure model, which was creating a lot of problems, right? Because these businesses should not be separate. They needed to work together. New business development was surprisingly large, 300 employees, well, last count 312, And their job was to go out and find new businesses for Empire International. They had a lot of power in the business. They were, when you think about them, think of old Enron. They were very, very aggressive, very ambitious, many MBAs. And their job was to negotiate deals around the world, whereby Empire International would build a power station in Cameroon, run a transmission line in Nigeria, take over the design work for a new nuclear research reactor in Macedonia. A very aggressive team, surprisingly a very influential part of Empire International, given the fact they were just involved in negotiations and finding new deals. And the reality is they were not very successful. Empire International had not actually been able to negotiate any new deals independently unless Empire International pulled them along and said, hey, work with us here. So surprisingly powerful given the fact they weren't able to do much. And my gut feel is that they were surprisingly powerful because of the people they hired. They had a lot of very, highly skilled brand name MBAs, and I felt that the Empire International CEO was also an MBA, and he had a lot of respect for American universities because he was trained there, and he gave them more room than they should have. Now, International's job is quite simple. They would take the new business that negotiated, and their job was to then run it. So, not just run it, but once the deal was close to finishing, it would come to International, whose job was to finish it, sign the deal, and then run it. Most of the deals were pretty large, and they were managed through joint ventures. So very few of the businesses International managed was wholly owned. There were a few that were wholly owned, but most of it were JVs and concessions with other power companies. Then there was a group called Other, which was also very big and sucking up a lot of cash, right? Now, Other consisted of over 50 core and non-core businesses. I would say the minority of them were core, related to the design, build, operating, and maintenance of generation, transmission, distribution assets, right? Three things stood out here. One is that Empire International was bidding for a mobile network license. They wanted to become a mobile phone company. They were quite far in their bidding process. They had already made their submission to the regulator, and they were about to have a spectrum of licensing block assigned to them within the next few months. If the licensing was assigned to them, they had to take it, or they had to negotiate with the regulator to back out of the deal because they had already signed a binding agreement. Big problem, this would suck up cash, right? You have to build a telephone company, basically. They were also doing a lot of nuclear development work without foreign investors. So this power utility, which is in the Middle East, doesn't have permission from anyone to build a nuclear capability, certainly not by the Americans and the European Union, but they had started research. And they were very confident that they would be given permission for a peaceful nuclear program. R&D is very costly. There's a reason it's called R&D, because it has no outcome, and this was sucking up a lot of cash. They were also a major investor in a World Cup bid, Soccer World Cup, and I think we all know which one I'm talking about, for 2022. They had a lot of money tied into that, because they were funding many of the infrastructure projects. The reality is that while this was a big deal, it paled in comparison to the mobile network license and the nuclear program. And of course, they had another tiny administrative arm where HR and finance and so on sat. So that's the structure of Empire International, right? Empire International's core is not very clear. They basically do anything that allows them to leverage their skills they built up when they used to build energy assets for Empire Energy. But they've expanded dramatically from their core business, right? A mobile network license is not even near their core. Now, despite all of these things, and despite working in a non-regulated market where they can charge any price they wanted, you think they'd make money, right? But this is the actual audit report from the Royal Inspector General, I suppose the word is. And they had come up with the conclusion that Empire International was struggling and forecast to run out of cash in 18 months. I mean, these numbers are quite scary, right? This is 2013, 2014, right? So 2014, Gross profit is okay. Net operating income is low. Profit drops to $9 million. Steep decline here. And based on their current run rate of cash usage, which doesn't take into consideration the expenditures that would dramatically go up if they got the telecoms license, and they had to make it, and within the next few months they had to make a decision on whether they want to invest more money into the nuclear program, which will obviously raise costs. Without even taking that into consideration, an independent committee said that they would run out of cash in 18 months. So this is what is driving all of the changes at Empire International. They are going to be bankrupt in 1.5 years, right? And the reality is that Empire International is losing money in the more profitable segment of the market, which doesn't make any sense. Because Empire Energy was making a ton of money in the less profitable market, because in the regulated market, profits are capped, and the amount of cost that can be passed to consumers through electricity prices is also capped. But in the unregulated market, Empire International can pretty much charge whatever it wants. And that wasn't working. So that's the background. Massive expansion, lost focus, going bankrupt. Now, remember that all of this is happening. At the same time, we have what is known as the Arab Spring, or you can call it whatever you want, right? And there's an enormous amount of conflict and strife in the Middle East and North Africa, where Empire Energy and Empire International have significant holdings. And while that is happening, right, so you've got this enormous strife, a lot of uncertainty, assets being damaged, and it's leading to the general deterioration of assets across the value chain. Assets are being burnt, they're being, gutted, and while that's happening, assets that are not being damaged, it's not that easy to maintain them because you can't get crews out to them. Now, so for those of you who are understanding it, who want some understanding about the electricity sector, this should give you a small view in terms of how it's structured. It's quite complicated, but you have to know the complexity. You have a generator, also known as a power plant. You get nuclear, coal, hydro, gas, primary types. You get other types like pump storage and so on, but they're not relevant to the Middle East. Now, you've got the company that generates electricity. Most of them are utilities. A utility is something that is controlled by a regulator, whereby the regulator determines what prices to be set and how much of the expenditure the utility incurs can be passed to the consumer in the basis of extra pricing. And you have non-utility producers like companies that build their own power plants and private companies and so on. Now, once you generate your electricity, you've got to get it to residential areas. The process of getting it there is known as transmission. Now, when you drive on big fields or you drive along roads in the rural areas, you'll see these things here. They are transmitting electricity. Once the electricity gets to a town or a home, a distribution company takes over and makes sure that the right amount of electricity, in simple terms, gets to the home, right? Empire Energy is involved across all of this. They're an integrated utility, which is not that common in the West, but in emerging markets it's pretty common. And they were suffering from a drop in revenue and an increase in the cost to replace damaged infrastructure. Now, obviously, if your infrastructure is being damaged, you have a lower generating capacity. Because if you can generate, enough power to light up 1 million homes with 10 power plants, if one power plant goes down, you have a lower generating capacity, right? If your transmission lines get damaged, you can't transmit the power, lower capacity. Now, generating capacity was going down because of all these problems in aging assets and problems in the Middle East, just as demand was rising and the reserve margin was being run down. So think about this. Problems in the Middle East, power plants were not being taken care of, and even before problems occurred in the Middle East, the power plants were not being maintained very well. Just as a lack of maintenance was causing some of them to shut down unnecessarily, things quietened down a little bit in the Middle East and growth started increasing again. Now, when growth starts increasing again, people want to light up their homes and they want to start companies which all consume power, right? That's why demand was rising. Now, there's something called the reserve margin in electricity pricing. And the reserve margin basically says that if a power company thinks that they have to produce enough power to light up 1 million homes, they will always have enough power to light up 1.2 million homes. The 0.2 million homes that it could light up is known as the reserve margin. That way, if their calculations are wrong, they always know they have 20% buffer in their system. But what happens here is that as demand increases, and if you don't increase your generating capacity, your reserve margin gets run down. And that's pretty much what was happening here. The reserve margin was being run down because demand was going up and the ability to produce electricity was going down. Now, these are the actual numbers here for this country in the Middle East. And as you can see here, that what they were trying to do is, here you had your actual demand, right, in megawatts all the way from 2012 to 2023. This is what their internal forecasters predicted it would be like. So as you can see, that pretty soon they're going to reach a point whereby demand here outstrips supply. And what they're hoping for is that demand side management, which means encouraging people to use light bulbs that consume less electricity, encouraging people to turn the lights off, encouraging companies to introduce more fuel efficient and electricity efficient systems. They were hoping that DSM would push down demand quite significantly, right? DSM is a pipe dream. It's going to have some impact, but it's not going to be a significant impact. The bottom line is, at some point soon, demand is going to outstrip supply in a big way. It's already happening in parts of the country. It's already happening in parts of the Middle East, and where you have rolling blackouts because there's just too much demand for the ability of the power company to produce the electricity. Now, typically what happens with demand just spikes on a night is most companies build what is known as peaking stations. A peaking station is basically a station which you can bring online very quickly when demand goes up. And most peaking stations around the world are what you call a gas turbine. You start burning gas, and it's very easy to turn on gas. I just turn it on. To start a coal station takes hours to start it up. So if demand spikes at 7 p.m. and just goes crazy, you can't start a coal station, but you can start a gas station in a few seconds. The other way to do it is to use pump storage, whereby you pump up water during the day to the top of a mountain. And when demand just spikes, you let the water run down over turbines. It turns the turbines and produces electricity. Now, if you've ever been to the Middle East, there are no mountains there, so pump storage is out of the question. These numbers come from the Royal Electricity Regulator, so these are not our numbers, these are their productions, but they seem to be right. I don't see why they would be wrong, right? Now, Empire Energy was attempting to stretch capacity to 2027. What that means is that by pushing down demand through demand-side planning, they were hoping that the supply of power in their system would be able to meet demand until at least 2027. Again, the reality showed that this was not happening because there were rolling blackouts happening right now in parts of the Middle East. Now, given this background, right, we had to be brought in to fix this problem. Now, why were we brought in? Well, our role was quite simple. We were appointed to develop a strategy to lead Empire International to profitability. Now, it's very important you understand this. We were told, okay, Empire International is struggling, lead us to profitability. But our final recommendation was extremely radical. Our recommendation was Empire International should not exist anymore. Now, you got to understand how big that is. You brought in to make a company profitable, and you basically say they need to shut down and not exist anymore. To be able to do that, you have to be damn sure of what you are saying. And in this entire set of videos that will follow, we will show you how we built the case why we built this case and how we convinced the client that this was the best option for them. Now, if you're a consultant or you are thinking about becoming a consultant or you're on the client side, because we do have many people in the industry watching these videos, let me assure you, it is very difficult to go to a company and tell them you hired us to lead you to profitability, but we think the best path for you is not to become profitable, but to cease to exist. Most companies wouldn't do that. It takes a lot. And the reason we do it is because my philosophy is that you should do the best work and develop the right answer irrespective of the consequences. And I suppose it's easy for firms consulting to do that because we're a boutique firm, right? We like to take on tough assignments. We like to take on assignments where the outcome has huge implications and it's not clear, and we like to do things that make sense. Developing this counterintuitive recommendations are difficult to do, but the study will show you how we came up to that conclusion. Basically, the questions we wanted to answer was, which markets, regions should Empire International operate in? Should they operate in just deregulated or regulated markets? Should they play across the value chain, generating, then transmitting, then distributing power? Should they be involved in Empire Energy's core or non-core business? And is Empire International critical or non-critical to Empire Energy? Then the question became, once we know this, where they operate, the question becomes how they operate. Should they design, build, operate, and or maintain assets, or should they do another combination of this? How deep in each segment of the value chain should they play? Very important question, right? And you can take that further to say, where does profit lie in the value chain? If profit doesn't lie in a part of a value chain, but it's important for Empire International to play there because Empire Energy needs it done, should they do it? Which comes to the final question. What is the nature of the relationship between Empire International and Empire Energy? Yes, Empire International is a wholly owned company of Empire Energy, but that doesn't mean much, right? It has a separate board, separate governance structure. So to what degree should Empire International support Empire Energy's strategy? What if Empire Energy's strategy calls for Empire International to exit certain key markets? Should Empire International do it? Should the support of Empire Energy be explicit or implicit? How do you implicitly support a company? Should you implicitly support a company? Shouldn't you make it explicit? Tough questions that we need to answer. And you'll see that we do it in a very elegant way, right? Now, the structuring of the study was quite simple. There's nothing complicated about this. We go through this in much more detail in the actual training. But basically, the role of corporate strategy is to determine three things. Which market should you play in, which region, and which part of the value chain. That's it. Nothing complicated about that. What is complicated is if you didn't know the structure of how to do corporate strategy, would you have known to come up with these questions? And in the training, we'll show you how to come up with these questions, why we came up with these versus other questions. Once we know the answers to this, we then say, okay, which business units or which companies within Empire International should be retained because they support the new corporate strategy? Which should be sold because they don't support it, and when should they be sold? And then obviously, if you retain the business units, how should they be managed in this very loosely controlled structure or tightly controlled? If this is the corporate strategy you've picked, and these are the BUs you've decided to keep, is value created? We have to choose a definition of value. And you'll notice that we use EV and EVA, and we use them very differently. In the training, we explain why, but we use two different measures to measure value, and we have very, very simple, clear reasons why we do it, and you'd actually kick yourself when I explain the reasons because it's so obvious. How do we maximize value, and how do we measure risk and therefore minimize it? So pick the regions to play, pick the business units that will help us play there successfully, do a calculation, quite a complex calculation, to ensure that we actually will create value by picking those regions and markets and those part of those value chains and working there through these business units. Now we have to basically operationalize this. We have to ask ourselves two questions. What is the best structure to allow this strategy to work? But here's a kicker. The best structure for this corporate strategy makes some assumptions about the skills. what if the skills you need are not there? If the skills you need are not there, you can have the best strategy and the best organizational structure, but you're not going to be able to implement it. So the question we ask is that, is there a material skills gap such that we have to either change the corporate strategy or the organizational design to mitigate the skills gap? If we have some skills advantage, can we alter the organizational design or the corporate strategy to more faster and more efficiently execute things? And that's the way you need to think about org design, corporate strategy, and management skills analysis. They are like on a triangle. They're sitting on different edges and they're each pulling on either side. You don't say, this is the corporate strategy and I don't care how you implement it, just implement it. Because weaknesses in either the organizational design or management skills can be fixed through changes in the corporate strategy. Weaknesses in corporate strategy and management skills can be fixed through corporate design. And weaknesses in management skills can be mitigated through better corporate design and corporate strategy. Once we've worked out how this triangle is going to work, and we have a whole methodology for that we put you through in the training, which is very detailed, by the way, especially on organizational design, because I've always felt that was terribly done in consulting. We then decide, how do we measure value, which we measured here. Then we say, okay, if this is the way we measure value, how does Stella, who works in procurement, measure herself? She obviously doesn't measure EVA, so she has to measure a metric which, when optimized, leads to an increase in EVA, right? And then finally, you got to get people to change their behavior, right? How do you change the behavior? My feeling is that unless you change incentives, it doesn't matter how much you communicate, people are not going to change. So communication is a huge part of this study, even though this is just the strategy planning phase. We spend a lot of time working on communication, talking to employees and so on, knowing full well that the bulk of the actual communication, for lack of a better word, implementation, will only occur in phase 2. But communication is already a significant part of this phase. Now, let's work through the problem statement, right? I mentioned earlier that in corporate strategy, 2 things are missing. One is the objective function, and second, the market you need to pick. Now, the purpose of corporate strategy, and remember this, is to determine an objective function and thereafter maximize it, right? Now, a lot of people say, but what do you mean pick an objective function? Isn't increasing shareholder value the objective function? Well, think about it. Saying you're increasing shareholder value is the same as saying nothing, because obviously every company is trying to do that. It's like saying every company's objective is to increase profits. And if that was true, every case is a profit case, but that's not true. Now, the reason why not having an objective function is important, well, actually understanding that not having an objective function is important, is to realize that without an objective function, you cannot build decision trees. Without decision trees, you cannot prioritize the branches. Without prioritized branches, you cannot build hypotheses. Without hypotheses to test, you cannot design the exhibits to test them. Without the tests or the exhibits, you cannot build work plans. And without the work plans, you cannot build storyboards from the exhibits. So this entire approach breaks down, right? And if you've watched the lab study and the corporate M&A study, this is the approach we used. Because those weren't formal high-end strategy, corporate strategy, right? This is high-end corporate strategy, whereby the client doesn't know what they want to be. The client isn't coming to you and say, oh, we want to be this kind of company, go after it. The fact that they don't know what they want to be means the objective function is not clear. And when the objective function is not clear, our job is to figure out what the objective function is, right? To do that, in the training, we're going to show you a 4-step process to use once you arrive at a client and you're doing high-end corporate strategy. For example, if a company like, which company is suffering? Let's say BlackBerry came to you and say, okay, we're suffering in our core market. Tell us what we need to be in the future. If a company comes to you with that kind of question where the objective function is not clear, these are the 4 questions that need to be answered. In the training, I will explain to you why we ask these 4 questions. I'll show you how we answer them. I'll show you how we edit them. I'll show you how we fact check them, how we verify them, and finally how we use them to develop a storyboard, guidance structure for the team, and the work plan. The bottom line is that at the end of the day, in true corporate strategy where the objective function is missing, there is an approach to use. So you don't have to panic about it. There is an approach to find the correct objective function. And it's built around these 4 questions. Obviously, the way you answer them and knowing why you're answering them is very important. Now, in terms of managing the study, the management of the study was unusual. The way we structured the study is that we had 15 consultants and partners on the study. Generally speaking, transformation studies have big teams. That's why we call them transformation studies, right? And in the training, I explained in a lot more detail the difference between transformation and general corporate strategy studies. But here, I'm not going to touch on that. It's too much detail, right? So we had the engagement director, a role I played. We had client leadership. We had a partner looking after corporate strategy, BU strategy, value analysis. We had a partner looking after O design, organizational design, management skills analysis, and the balanced scorecard. And then we had another partner sitting here in orange. That partner had a very unique role. As you can see, that partner doesn't report into any of the other partners. They're independent. That partner and her team of 1 person, their job was to work with the client leadership team. And their role was simple. While the entire study team, all of us here, was focused on making sure the strategy worked and the plans, no one was actually looking at the client leadership team to make sure that they were energized, they were developing personally, they were able to keep to their time commitments, they were able to stay energized throughout all of this. There was no one helping them do that, right? There was just nobody helping them do that. So, this partner's role was to do that. Help them through any problems they had. It was basically about personal leadership development. Not really touchy-feely stuff, because I did feel that this partner played a really big role in keeping the client leadership team engaged, but also giving them the motivation and energy to push through. For example, if the client leadership team, let's say the CFO, was really struggling with communication, this partner would work with that CFO to make sure that that skill was covered. Important role, we've never had that in a study before, but we thought it made sense. The digital team is the team that was working to put together all these slides and maps. Unlike previous studies whereby we finished the study and then we'd start the mapping exercise and building the training, we started doing this on the study. That is why we were able to release the study so quickly, right? Now, strategy has a corporate strategy component, BU strategy, value analysis. Now, what you will see in the actual training is I will tell you the backgrounds of each of these people. I'll show you how they performed, so you can see whether someone who comes from Deloitte does better than someone who comes from McKinsey, whether a partner that comes from McKinsey is better than a partner that comes from PwC up here. The results are pretty surprising, right? But here you can get an understanding of the team. EM means engagement manager, business analyst is obvious, and start means the week in which they started. So the bottom line is that week 1, which is this team and this team, they were kind of the reconnaissance team. They went in there for just 2 weeks, week 1 and week 2, and they validated our approach. And as soon as they said, look, the approach we had developed to help this client made sense, then the other team started. If they had went in and said, you know what, we've completely misunderstood this client, our approach doesn't make sense, then they would have changed the structure of the project with myself as the engagement director and the client, and we would have fielded a different team. I like the reconnaissance model, and I believe that going forward for other studies, we most likely would use it as well. Now, beyond the structure of the team, and of course, there's lots more details. There's an entire training section in terms of performance, structuring, team management, and so on. Beyond that, I'm just going to focus on some of the key milestones here, right? Now, you can see corporate strategy, business unit review, business case. 4 other streams are missing. And obviously, those 4 streams would be org design, management skills analysis, balanced scorecard, and of course, the partnership stream. Now, what I want to show you here is just the big buckets of work that was done, and I want you to pay attention to the orange parts. SC, 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 you can see it's happening in every single week. SC is known as SteerCo. SteerCo, if you had to think about the management structure of Empire International, they've got their board, they've got Exco, they've got Manco, actually they've got Opco here, and they've got Manco, and then they've got probably employees here. So you've got your board, then you've got the Exco, which is the CEO and his committee. Then you have the operating committee, which is the heads of the biggest divisions within Empire International. And then you've got management committee, who are their direct reports, right? Now, there's a unit here called SteerCo. SteerCo is something we created. We would provide feedback to the heads of all, well, not to the heads, to the direct reports of all of the individual businesses, the largest individual businesses within Empire International. Now, you may ask a question, why are we reporting back to these people so often weekly? And that is explained in the training, where we say that in a transformation study, things are happening as the study is going ahead. There's no time to wait for the strategy to be developed. Because the client is doing things as they want to on a daily basis, we have to give them guidance weekly so that they don't do something that we don't want them to do. And that's extremely difficult act to manage. Imagine telling someone to not do something here, knowing full well that the analysis will only be finished here. Now, I must be honest, I picked up some gray hair and I lost the other part that didn't turn gray just through dealing with SteerCo. It's extremely stressful. There's always problems of leakages into the press. There's always problems of misunderstanding. We had lots of problems dealing with them, but the net effect is that we were able to manage the client very well because we were dealing with this huge committee of 18 people and meeting them weekly. OpCo are all the people that run support services, internationalization, and so on, and new business development. There are basically 4 people in OpCo. We only met them once because they're not that important, and the CEO said that he's going to replace them, so there's no point to get their permission on anything. So we basically ran the entire project through SteerCo, which again, if you think of Empire International structure, you've got EI here, you've got support services, new business, internationalization. Underneath that, you've got company 1, company 2, company 3. Underneath them, you've got the heads of the little parts of the company. SteerCo is made up of some of these guys, but mostly these guys. So you can see what a low level of input we were having, right? But we had to, because that's the difference between just corporate strategy and a corporate strategy taking place during a transformation program. Then, we also had these big workshops here. These big triangles indicate major updates. And you can see here that these 2 black diamonds, visioning workshop at the end of week 4 and visioning workshop at the end of week 10, they're probably the most important moments in the entire study. We have an entire section of the study just dedicated to that one workshop. Over 1,000 slides, and I think it's something like 100 videos of the entire training program is dedicated to helping you understand that workshop, and another 100 videos to that workshop. Why? Because when you leave consulting and you join a major firm, the ability to run a strategy workshop is a key skill that's expected of you, right? So if you're in industry and you want to show that you have the chops of a top consultant, if you can manage that workshop, you'll be hired. When I was leaving consulting, well, headhunted, I remember having coffee with the CFO of a major resources company, one of the top 3 in the world, and our entire discussion was around how to manage those workshops. If you look at people like Michael Carpenter, who worked at BCG, amazing strategy partner, who went on to run corporate planning and corporate strategy at General Electric under Jack Welch, all he did was manage these workshops. If you can manage those workshops, you have the skill of operating like a senior strategy person in a major company. Because executives don't make decisions through tiny pages of analysis, which is what most people think happens. They make decisions through these workshops, and you have to be able to manage those workshops. There's 2 of them, and I can assure you they are big, right? For example, let's look at the first visioning workshop. In the first visioning workshop, we have to run a scenario planning exercise. We have to present case studies of all the big companies. You can see the case studies we presented, how we structured them, the key lessons we took out of it. You can see the trends analysis we put together. What were the sections, why we put it together that way, what were the big things we took out of it. You can see the value chain analysis we did, how we did it, why we did it this way, what we presented. So all of that is presented for you in a lot of detail so you can understand how to do this process. Very, very critical. If you want to be a senior person in strategy and you cannot do that, you are not a senior person in strategy. Because at the end of the day, you don't get decisions with your executive committee by mailing them pretty PowerPoint slides. No, you've got to facilitate a session where you get them to make decisions using strategy input. That is a workshop. A skill you must learn. If you don't have that skill, learn it. Even if you worked at a consulting firm, because we have a lot of McKinsey and BCG people who subscribe, and you don't have that skill, I would recommend strongly that you pick up the skill in this training, right? Also, I thought it would be useful this time around to show you how we laid out the project room. Now, I'm a big believer in white, so my room looked like something from a movie from the future, and I think white is a clean color, and I like things that are simple. So this is the layout of the room, right? We had the team doing corporate strategy, BU strategy, and value analysis sitting here. Organizational design sitting here. They need a lot of space to lay out all the structures and pour over them like architectural drawings. Balanced scorecard and management skills analysis sat together. The digital project team and support team sat at the front where the door is. And they basically did all the research, formatting all the slides, putting together the map and so on under my supervision. But they also sat with the support team who were setting up meetings, managing diaries, and helping us with slide design. I would sit here, and when I say I'd sit here, I don't mean I sat alone. This space was reserved for myself and the senior client team so we can discuss the study. But generally, whoever wanted to sit there sat there. I didn't really have a problem with it. And then we had this huge table, which allowed everyone to get together and project stuff onto a wall so we can discuss things. You notice how far away we are from the walls. That's because I like putting stuff up on the walls. I wanted, pretty high ceilings, 10-foot ceilings. And I wanted us to be able to lay out stuff on the walls so that clients could see what was happening. Now, if you don't know that technique, it's called, I explained this in quite a lot of detail in the tech merger strategy study, where I show you these maps that we put up onto the wall to keep clients abreast of what is happening. It's taught in excessive detail. I'm not going to go through it again, right? Now, I spoke briefly about the first executive workshop, that first strategy workshop. But to maybe move away from, the mechanics of how we bring it together and talk more about the objectives, the objective was rather simple. We had to limit the scope of Empire International's extensive activities worldwide. Why are we going to do it? What would happen if we wouldn't do it? That's all taught in the training. The why, the how, the consequences and so on is all taught in the training. But in a nutshell, we had to decide, are they going to play across the entire value chain? Are they going to be involved in business development and enabling businesses? That's just question one. Question two, generation, transmission, distribution, one or the either, or a combination thereof, and where. Will they play in Eastern Europe only? Middle East, North Africa. Eastern Europe, Middle East, North Africa, or rest of the world, or some combination. Will they play in Eastern Europe? It's possible they would just want Middle East, North Africa, or maybe that. But we have to decide that, right? Now, in the training, we explain to you why setting these limits are so important, why we can set these limits so early, because obviously this is only week 4, right? And some of you may argue correctly that if we set these limits too early, what if we turn out to be wrong? The way we set up the study allows us to test the limits we set. But there is a reason we need to set the limits up front. It has a lot to do with hypotheses. And finally, this is the big picture overview of that first workshop. That super important workshop that if you can manage and you can design and run, you can show people that, you know what, not only are you an ex-consultant, or if you're not a consultant, you think like a consultant, but you think like a senior consultant. This part here is scenario analysis. This part here is input into the scenario analysis. Case studies, trends analysis. Now, not only do we present this to you in the training, we go step by step through each phase. If you really want to know it, you can actually read the entire trends pack. I think it's something like 400 pages that we put together, highlighting what's happening in the energy sector for this client. You can read the entire analysis we put together. Of course, if energy is not your cup of tea, you don't have to read the whole thing. We put together a summary pack of just a few slides to show you the most important things we took out of the trends analysis that we served as an input here. Same, you can read the whole case study or read the 2-slide summary to show you the most important things we took out. You can read the entire value chain analysis or read the 2-slide summary. So here, we're catering for 2 groups of people. One group who wants to understand energy and wants to be a strategy consultant within energy. The other group is those who just want to be a strategy consultant and couldn't care less about energy, but we're using the energy sector as an example to show you how to do this analysis, right? We also explain how to do scenario analysis, why it's done incorrectly, how we made adjustments for this study. There is a lot of detail. I've never seen a training program so comprehensive when it comes to explaining that very important strategy workshops that need to take place. And in terms of managing the business units, right? Obviously, business unit strategy is an entirely separate study team. It's an entire separate study working out here. There are many ways we did this, and it's a big section in itself. But to give you an understanding of what we were doing, we were trying to figure out which business units were core to the new strategy of Empire International, and if they were not core, were they critical or non-critical? And depending on whether they were core, critical, or non-critical, and whether they were performing or not performing, we came up with a plan to manage them. Now, I can assure you that the actual analysis and the actual way of managing these business units was a lot more complicated. This one slide is to give you a sense of what we did. But, this is only working for the most high priority business units. What about the non-priority business units? How do we manage them? Can you use a simple one slide to determine the livelihoods of 50,000 people? Can you do that? I think not. So you will see a lot of very nuanced analysis to distinguish between the business units and which ones we chose to keep and which ones we chose to get rid of. But in a nutshell, this was the principle driving it. But the analysis and adjustments we make are more important, because tier 2 level of importance business units need to be managed differently from tier 1 business units, right? Now, of course, nothing is done without understanding the cost of your transformation, right? You can't make all these recommendations and say, we don't know how much it will cost. So the value analysis, aka business analysis team, came up with the following 6-step process. One is, of our new core business, let's assume we decided a core business, right? What would be the capital required to build out that core? So that's money that is going out, cash going out to build out the business. Then we're going to right size the core. Another word of saying we're going to sell off parts of it, fire people and so on. That is money that will be saved or cash coming in. Then we're going to sell non-core assets, cash coming in. Then we're going to need working capital to maintain the non-core businesses until they're divested, cash going out. Then we need to have working capital to operate the core, cash going out. And then we have capital released through the closure of non-core assets, hopefully cash coming in. The net effect of that must be positive, so that must cancel out each other so that we actually have value being created. And this was the work that the value analysis team did, which you can track. How do they measure this? How do they work out the core businesses? How do they work out the cash that will be released? How do they decide when to sell it, whom to sell it to, and so on? One slide, but a fairly significant part of the entire study. And value analysis became very important. In fact, one of the slides they put together became so central to the study that it was distributed all over the client, right? And it's not shown here, but I can assure you that it is a very elegant solution to numerically answering the question, what is core? What is core? How do you prove what is core? It's very easy to say, oh, it's core because it's similar, but how do you prove it? How can you numerically prove it? And that's what the team came up with. I would say it's one of the proudest moments of the study when I saw that analysis and had this discussion with the value analysis team in terms of what they're putting together. Finally, this study, you'll notice that while it's a 12-week study, from week 9 or week 8, we start shifting heavily towards implementation and implementation planning, right? So we will show you why we shifted in week 9 towards implementation planning. How we made that shift. Why we made the shift. What changes did we make to the team and the structure that allowed us to make the shift? How did we present it to the client? How did we restructure the teams to be wrapping up the analysis and shifting towards implementation? What did we show the client with regards to implementation? How did we get the phase 2 of the study, which we have been retained to do, right? We'll also show you, very importantly, how to build these detailed implementation plans. This is not that detailed, but it shows you the initial version of it, and we'll show you how to make adjustments to come up with a final version of it. Now, if you're wondering what's different between these two, it is the orange part. So, for example, why did strategy realization have no, think about it, right? There's no business case validation and realization in the previous one. What changed? Why did cleaning out the core businesses, internationalization strategy become so important, but it wasn't initially important in week 9? What changed between week 9 and week 12 that caused that change? Organizational alignment, big change, right? Here, support services design, basically support services is 80% of the business. All of the key work around designing, building, operating power stations lies here. Why is it that in the final week this became so important to reorganize that business, but it doesn't appear anywhere here in week 9? Does it mean our analysis was wrong? No. But we'll explain in the training how those changes take place, why they take place, and how we adjust them, right? Obviously, the training provides more explanations for each of these, but this is an indication, it's an overview of what you can expect. And then finally, we produced these. This is a very simplified version of these detailed plans we put together. This is one plan just for support services, right? So for each area of the business, we want to manage the implementation. And we can break this down to the smallest area of the business, right? We can do this for Empire International, for support services, for a business within support services, for a business of a business within support services. We will say, okay, what is the timeline over a year? What are the big buckets of activities needed to be completed to complete the implementation of what we are recommending? And then what are the targets we are aiming to hit at 4 months, at 8 months, at 12 months? The detail is not important because I need to talk this through to you, but this gives you a sense of the scope of the study. And I would end up here by saying that, the firm's consulting executive program is the most comprehensive strategy, operations, implementation training program of its kind anywhere in the world. There is no program that trains people, consultants, executives, students, to understand and to be able to execute strategy, operations, implementation studies like what we have. And remember, our goal is always to make it in such a way that you can walk in and confidently and accurately complete any study to the highest standards that is expected of ex-consultants. Basically, you're learning all of the skills without having to work at the major consulting firms. And I think that this is, one, it's different from the other studies. It's also the most comprehensive and the most difficult study we ran. So you can get a sense of how to work in quite a complex situation. Of course, you can see all of the full detailed training programs in the map we've now released. And over the next few months, we'll be releasing different steps of the map with more and more videos to come out.